The laughter echoed through the large classroom like thunder. 12 different alien species sat in rows, their eyes filled with amusement as they stared at the holographic display. On the screen, images of human warriors flashed one after another. Men with swords fighting giant monsters. Soldiers standing alone against entire armies. Women leading impossible charges against overwhelming odds. "This is what humans call mythology," Professor Kethron said, his forearms gesturing at the display. The tall, blue-skinned instructor's voice carried obvious mockery. "They create stories about their own species, performing impossible feats of combat." Cadet Vex High raised one of his razor-sharp claws. The insectoid creature's compound eyes gleamed with cruel humor. "Professor, are we supposed to believe humans actually think they can fight like this? Look at them. No natural weapons. No armor. Plating. No enhanced senses." More laughter filled the room. The other cadets nodded their agreement. Morgan, whose rock-like skin could stop plasma bullets, pounded his massive fist on his desk. "Humans are soft meat," he rumbled in his deep voice. "I could crush 10 of them with one hand." Silara, the pale telepathic being, smiled with her perfect white teeth. "I scanned a human merchant last week. Their minds are so simple, full of fear and doubt. Nothing like the mighty warriors in these silly stories." Only one person in the classroom stayed quiet. Lisa Carter sat in the back row, her dark hair hiding her face as she looked down at her tablet. She was the only human student at the Galactic Military Institute. Every day, she listened to aliens mock her species. Every day, she wrote down their insults in her private notes. Professor Kethran changed the display. Now it showed human soldiers from real battles. The images were grainy and old. These are actual combat records from human military history. As you can see, reality is much different from their fantasy stories. The hologram showed human troops retreating from alien forces. It showed human ships being destroyed in space battles. It showed humans surrendering when faced with superior alien technology. "Pathetic," whispered Cadet Zarex, his serpentine body coiling with amusement. "They run from real fights, but dream of being heroes." Vex High clicked his mandibles together. "I heard humans tell stories about something called berserkers, warriors who become unstoppable in battle." "What a joke. Any real predator species would eat these berserkers for breakfast." The class erupted in fresh laughter. Even Professor Kethran couldn't hide his smile. "Indeed, Cadet Vex High, human mythology reveals a species that compensates for obvious physical weakness with elaborate fantasy." Lisa's hand gripped her stylus so tight it nearly cracked. She wanted to speak up. She wanted to tell them they were wrong. But she was one human against a room full of aliens who could kill her without thinking. Professor Kethron continued his lecture. "This is why studying alien mythology is important for military officers. It reveals the psychological weaknesses of potential enemies. Human stories show us a species that fears its own inadequacy." Morgon raised his massive hand. "Professor, why do humans even try to serve in galactic military forces? They must know they are useless in real combat." "Excellent question," the professor replied. "Humans serve mostly in support roles. Communications, logistics, basic technical work. They are not trusted with actual fighting duties." Silara's telepathic abilities let her sense emotions. She could feel Lisa's anger and hurt from across the room. The feeling was so strong, it almost made her uncomfortable. But she pushed the sensation away. Human emotions were weak things, not worth her attention. The classroom door chimed softly. Commander Zethkar entered with his usual military precision. The reptilian officer's scales gleamed under the artificial lights. All the cadets stood and saluted. "At ease," Commander Zethkar said in his hissing voice. "I have an announcement. You will be receiving a new combat instructor tomorrow. The cadets looked interested. New instructors usually meant new training methods and challenges. This instructor will be teaching advanced warfare tactics, the commander continued. The subject will focus on asymmetric combat and psychological warfare techniques. Vexhi's antenna twitched with curiosity. What species is the new instructor, sir? Commander Zethkar's expression was unreadable. Human. The silence that followed was complete. Then, slowly, the snickering began. It started with more guns. Deep chuckle and spread through the room like a disease. A human? Cadet Zerax couldn't hide his disbelief. Teaching combat tactics to superior species? This should be entertaining, Vexhi said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What can a human possibly teach us about warfare? Even Professor Kethran looked amused by the news. He exchanged a meaningful glance with Commander Zethkar, as if they shared some private joke. Commander Zethkar held up one clawed hand for silence. The instructor's name is Jake Morrison. He comes highly recommended by human military command. You will treat him with the same respect you show all instructors. Of course, sir, Vexhi said, but his tone suggested otherwise. We look forward to learning about human combat techniques. More quiet laughter rippled through the room. The cadets were already imagining the fun they would have with their new human instructor. They would test his limits, challenge his authority, and prove once again that humans had no place teaching real warriors. Lisa Carter finally looked up from her tablet. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her dark eyes held something the aliens might have recognized if they had bothered to look closely. It was not fear or shame. It was anticipation. Commander Zethkar finished his announcement and left. The room. Professor Kethran dismissed the class with a wave of his forearms. The cadets filed out, still chuckling about their upcoming human instructor. This will be better than the mythology class, Mordaunt said to his friends. We get to see human delusions in person. I wonder if he will tell us berserker stories, Vexhi added with mock excitement. Maybe he thinks he is one of those mythical human warriors. Solara gathered her materials slowly. As she passed Lisa's desk, she felt another wave of strong emotion from the human. But this time, it was not anger or hurt. It was something else entirely. Something that made the telepathic alien pause for just a moment. Lisa looked up and met Solara's gaze directly. For the first time since joining the academy, the human student smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that should have served as a warning, but Solara was too arrogant to recognize danger from a supposedly inferior species. She walked away, dismissing the strange feeling. Lisa was the last student to leave the classroom. She walked slowly through the corridors of the prestigious military academy, listening to the continued jokes and laughter about the new human instructor. The alien cadets were so confident in their superiority. They had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, Jake Morrison would arrive, and everything would change. Jake Morrison walked through the main entrance of the Galactic Military Institute, carrying only a worn canvas bag. He was not what the alien cadets expected. No impressive uniform covered in medals. No advanced weapons or intimidating gear. Just a middle-aged human in simple military clothing, his graying hair cut short and neat. The cadets watched him from the observation deck above the main hall. They had gathered there specifically to get their first look at the human instructor who thought he could teach them about warfare. That's him? Vexhi's mandibles clicked with amusement. He looks like someone's grandfather. Mordoon's rocky features twisted into what passed for a grin. I expected someone larger. This human barely reaches my chest. Solara studied the newcomer with her telepathic senses. She tried to read his surface thoughts, as she did with all new people. But something strange happened. When her mental probe touched Jake Morrison's mind, she encountered something that made her pull back. Immediately. It was like touching ice-cold metal in the dark. "What did you sense?" asked Cadet Turval, noticing her sudden stillness. "Nothing important," Solara laid. She did not want to admit that a human mind had surprised her. There had been something. In there, something carefully controlled and deeply buried. But it was probably just human confusion, or fear. Jake Morrison checked in with the administration office without ceremony. He spoke quietly with the staff, answered their questions, and received his teaching schedule. He did not seem to notice or care about the alien cadets watching him from above. An hour later, the cadets filed into Combat Tactics Classroom 7 for their first lesson with the human instructor. They entered with the casual arrogance of superior beings humoring an inferior species. Some were already planning how they would challenge and embarrass him. Jake Morrison stood behind the instructor's podium, reviewing notes on his tablet. He looked up as the cadets took their seats, his calm gray eyes moving from face to face without expression. "Good morning," he said in his steady voice. "I'm Jake Morrison. I'll be teaching you asymmetric warfare for the next 8 weeks." Vex High raised his claw without waiting to be called upon. "Instructor Morrison, what makes you qualified to teach superior species about combat?" The other cadets leaned forward, eager to see how the human would handle this direct challenge. They expected nervousness, maybe anger, possibly some defensive. Speech about human capabilities. Jake Morrison's expression did not change at all. "I've been in combat for 23 years. I've fought 12 different alien species in various conflicts. Some of those species are represented in this classroom." He paused, letting his eyes rest on each cadet for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Any other questions before we begin?" Morden's deep voice rumbled through the room. "Have you ever actually won a fight against a superior species? Or do you just run away like other humans?" A few cadets chuckled at this obvious insult. They waited for the human's reaction. "Today we're going to discuss the basic principles of asymmetric warfare," Jake said, completely ignoring the question. He activated the wall display, which showed a tactical map. "Can anyone tell me what asymmetric warfare means?" Solara decided. "To participate, mostly to show off her knowledge. It refers to conflicts between opponents of unequal strength, where the weaker side uses unconventional methods to overcome superior force." "Correct," Jake said. "And what makes a force superior?" "Better weapons, stronger bodies, advanced technology," Vex High answered with obvious pride. "Sometimes," Jake agreed, "those are certainly advantages. But they can also become weaknesses if your opponent understands how to exploit them." The cadets exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of human delusion they had expected. The weak trying to convince themselves they could overcome the strong through clever thinking. Jake continued his lesson without seeming to notice their skepticism. He discussed historical battles where smaller forces had defeated larger ones. He explained how terrain, timing, and psychology could matter more than raw strength. "For your first assignment," he said as the class period ended, "I want you to research the Battle of Kethmoran. Write a report on the tactics used and why they were effective." Cadet Zarhek's forked tongue flicked out in a gesture of disdain. "What does some obscure human battle have to do with real warfare?" "Who said it was a human battle?" Jake asked. Quietly, the cadets left the classroom feeling victorious. Their new human instructor was exactly what they had expected. Boring, theoretical, probably hiding his species' military failures behind fancy academic language. "Did you see how he avoided Mordoon's question?" Vex High said as they walked to their next class. "Typical human cowardice." "He's probably never been in real combat," Turval agreed. "Just another human pretending to be a warrior." But Sil-Ara said nothing. Something about Jake Morrison bothered her. When she had tried to read his emotions during class, She had felt nothing at all. Most beings projected some kind of mental energy, confidence, fear, anger, excitement. Jake Morrison projected absolutely nothing, as if his mind was wrapped in thick metal walls. That afternoon, Lisa Carter found the alien cadets in the Academy's research center. They were gathered around a computer terminal, trying to access files. About the Battle of Kethmorin. Having trouble? She asked innocently. The human instructor gave us some pointless assignment, Vexai said without looking up. We're supposed to research some battle that probably never happened. I can help you access the military database, Lisa offered. I have research permissions for my own projects. The alien cadets accepted her help without gratitude. To them, she was just a useful tool, like a computer or a scanner. They did not bother to thank her as she logged into the restricted military archives. Here it is, Lisa said, pulling up the file. Battle of Kethmorin. 3 years ago. The cadets leaned closer to read the official report. What they saw was not what they expected. The battle had lasted 6 hours. A full Krex-High battle fleet, 200 warships with 50,000 alien warriors, had been completely destroyed. The attacking force had consisted of exactly 1 human transport ship with 12 soldiers aboard. This must be a mistake, Mordon said, his rocky brow furrowing. 12 humans against 50,000 Krex-High? Impossible. Lisa scrolled through the report. Most of the details were classified, marked with heavy black bars that blocked out important information. But some facts were clear. The human team had infiltrated the Krex-High command ship. They had disabled the fleet's communications and weapons systems. They had caused a cascade failure that destroyed every ship in the formation. Look at this. Silara pointed to a section near the end of the report. The Krex-High survivors described the human soldiers as demons and ghosts. They said the humans moved like living shadows and struck without warning. Vex-High's compound eyes studied the casualty figures. 50,000 Krex-High dead. 12 human soldiers. 0 human casualties. Uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The Krex-High were known throughout the galaxy as vicious fighters. Their warrior culture was built on personal combat and aggressive tactics. The idea that humans had defeated them so completely seemed impossible. It must be propaganda, Torvald said finally. Humans exaggerating their victories to make themselves look strong. But Lisa had found something else in the file. A list of the human soldiers who had participated in the battle. Most of the names were classified, replaced with code designations. Ghost 1 through Ghost 12. One name was partially visible through the classification marks. J. Morrison. Calcine Ghost 6. Lisa looked up at the alien cadets with that same unsettling smile from the day before. You should probably read the rest of the file, she said quietly. There are a lot more battles listed here. The cadets spent the next 3 hours going through combat reports. Battle after battle where human forces had achieved impossible victories. Each report mentioned the same things: psychological warfare, unconventional tactics, and enemy forces that surrendered rather than continue fighting. By the time they finished reading, the alien cadets were no longer laughing about their human instructor. They were starting to wonder if there was more to Jake Morrison than they had realized, but they were still too proud to admit that a human might actually be dangerous. They convinced themselves that the reports were exaggerated, that the real story was less impressive than the official version. They had no idea that Jake Morrison had been watching them research his old missions. He had been standing in the shadows outside the research center, observing their reactions through the window. Tomorrow's lesson was going to be much more interesting. The alien cadets could not stop thinking about the battle reports. For 3 days, they had been accessing more and more classified files, each one more disturbing than the last. What had started as a joke assignment had become an obsession. Vex-High. had barely slept. His compound eyes burned from staring at computer screens, reading account after account of human military operations. Each report followed the same impossible pattern. Small human teams achieving victories that should have been impossible. "This one doesn't make sense either," he muttered, showing the others a file on his tablet. The Siege of Vortex Station. 300 Montari warriors trapped a single human soldier in a supply depot. The human had no weapons, no communication, no backup. Morden leaned over to read the report. What happened? The human held the depot for 6 days. When reinforcements arrived, they found all 300 Montari dead. The human had used basic supplies to create traps, weapons, and psychological warfare tools. Solara felt a chill run down her spine. Her own species, the Montari, were natural predators. They had evolved to hunt in coordinated groups, using their enhanced senses and reflexes to overwhelm prey. One human should have been easy prey for 300 of her people. "There has to be an explanation," she said. Maybe the human had hidden weapons. Maybe the Montari were already wounded or sick. But Turval had found something else. Look at this interview with a Kronan veteran. He served with humans during the Outer Rim conflicts. The interview transcript was disturbing. The Kronan soldier described watching human troops in combat. He talked about humans who continued fighting after taking wounds that should have killed them. He described human soldiers who seemed to become more dangerous as battles became more desperate. "The human I fought beside lost his left arm to plasma fire," the Kronan veteran had said. "He picked up his severed arm and used it as a club to beat 3 enemy soldiers to death. Then he used his own blood to mark enemy positions so our artillery could target them." Morden's rocky skin paled to a lighter gray. "That's impossible. No species can function after losing a limb." "Humans can," Lisa Carter said quietly. She had been watching them research from across the library. "Pain and injury make humans more dangerous, not less. We call it survival instinct." The alien cadets turned to look at her. For the first time since meeting her, they paid attention to what the human was saying. "You're exaggerating," Vexhai said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Lisa pulled up another file on her tablet. Battle of Nexus 7. A human medic named Kate Sullivan was treating wounded soldiers when enemy forces overran the medical station. She fought for 3 hours to protect her patients. "How many enemies?" Solara asked. 47. She killed 31 of them with medical tools and improvised weapons. When backup arrived, they found her still fighting with a broken leg and a collapsed lung. The alien cadets stared at the combat footage Lisa had accessed. The human medic moved through the medical station like a vengeful spirit, using surgical instruments as weapons, turning medical equipment to traps. "She's not even a combat soldier," Turval whispered. "She's a healer." "Among humans, there's not much difference," Lisa said. "We all learn to fight when we have to." Meanwhile, Jake Morrison's classes had become increasingly unsettling. He no longer stuck to theoretical discussions. Instead, he had begun demonstrating tactics that seemed impossible for a human to perform. During a lesson on stealth movement, Jake had somehow crossed the entire classroom without making a sound. None of the cadets had seen him move. One moment he was at the front of the room, the next he was standing directly behind Vexhai. "Sound travels differently in various atmospheric conditions," Jake had said calmly, as if appearing like a ghost was perfectly normal. "Understanding acoustic principles can make you invisible to species that rely on enhanced hearing." Vexhai's natural predator instincts had been screening danger, but his eyes and ears had detected nothing. It was like being stalked by something. That existed only in nightmares. The next day, Jake demonstrated camouflage techniques. He had somehow made himself nearly invisible against the classroom wall. using nothing but standard military clothing and basic materials. Visual camouflage is not about hiding, he explained, his voice seeming to come from empty air. It's about making your opponent's advantages work against them. Mordoon's enhanced vision should have been able to detect any hidden figure. His species had evolved to spot prey hiding in rocky terrain. But Jake Morrison had somehow fooled senses that were designed to be unfoolable. The cadets began to feel unsettled in ways they could not explain. Jake never threatened them directly. He never raised his voice or showed anger. But his presence had begun to feel oppressive, like a weight pressing down on their minds. Solara's telepathic abilities were becoming more sensitive to Jake's mental state. Whatever she had sensed on the first day was growing stronger. It was not exactly hostile, but it was controlled in a way that made her nervous. Like a weapon that was carefully aimed, but not yet fired. Strange things began happening around the academy. Equipment malfunctions occurred in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Lights would flicker in corridors where cadets walked alone. Security cameras would lose signal at exactly the wrong moments. Vex High found his private quarters disturbed one morning. Nothing was missing, but his personal items had been moved slightly. The changes were subtle. A book turned to a different page, a photo frame angled differently, his combat gear arranged in a new pattern. When he checked with Academy security, they showed him the surveillance footage. According to the cameras, no one had entered his room. The recordings showed his belongings moving by themselves, which was impossible. It must be a technical glitch, the security officer said. But Vex High noticed that the alien guard would not meet his eyes. Even the security staff seemed nervous about something. Mordun experienced similar incidents. His massive strength meant he was not easily intimidated, but even he began to feel uneasy. Sounds echoed through the walls of his quarters at night, footsteps that stopped whenever he tried to locate their source. During combat training, the cadets found themselves making mistakes they never made before. Their timing was off. Their coordination was clumsy. It was as if something was interfering with their natural abilities. Solara tried to use her telepathic senses to understand what was happening. But whenever she reached out with her mind, she encountered that same cold metal sensation. It was getting stronger, more focused. Like something was watching her watch it, the alien cadets began meeting in secret to discuss their experiences. They gathered in Turval's quarters late at night, speaking in whispers about things they could not explain. There's something wrong with the human instructor, Vex High said. The way he moves, the way he appears and disappears. It's not natural. Nothing about him is natural, Mordun agreed. I've fought humans before. They're weak, scared, easy to intimidate. Jake Morrison is different. Solara nodded slowly. I've been trying to read his mind for days. There's something in there, something he's keeping locked away. It feels like barely controlled violence. You think he's planning to attack us? Turval asked. No, Solara said quietly. I think he's planning to teach us something. And I don't think we're going to like the lesson. The cadets decided to dig deeper into Jake Morrison's military record. They wanted to understand what they were dealing with. Lisa Carter helped them access even more classified files, though she seemed increasingly amused by their research. What they found changed everything. Jake Morrison was not just any human soldier. He was Ghost 6, leader of the most feared human Special Operations Unit in galactic history. His team had been responsible for victories that had become legend among human forces and nightmare among their enemies. The Battle of Kethmoran had not been his first impossible victory. It had been his most recent. For over 2 decades, Jake Morrison had been the galaxy's most effective practitioner of psychological warfare. He had earned a reputation that made entire enemy armies surrender rather than face him in battle. Alien species throughout the galaxy told stories about Ghost 6, though most believed he was just a human myth. The cadets realized they had been wrong about everything. Human mythology was not compensation for weakness. It was a warning about what humans could become when properly motivated. And now one of those mythical humans was their instructor Dot, as they sat in the dark, whispering about their discoveries. None of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows outside Turval's window. Jake Morrison had been observing their secret meetings, listening to their frightened conversations. Tomorrow, he decided it was time to move beyond theory and into practical application. Jake Morrison stood before his class with the same calm expression he had worn for weeks, but today felt different. The alien cadets could sense something had changed, though they could not identify what it was. Today, we begin practical exercises, Jake announced. You've spent enough time reading about asymmetric warfare. Now you'll experience it firsthand. Vexhi's compound eyes tracked Jake's movements with nervous precision. What kind of exercises, instructor? Survival tactics against superior forces, Jake replied. The Academy has approved a special training program. For the next 72 hours, you'll be participating in a combat simulation. Commander Zethkar entered the classroom, carrying a datapad with official orders. The Academy's security systems have been modified to create a realistic training environment. You'll be operating under combat conditions with limited resources. Morden raised his massive hand. What are we supposed to be surviving against? Jake's gray eyes met the rocky alien's gaze. Me. The silence that followed was complete. The cadets exchanged glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. You want us to fight you? Silara asked, her telepathic senses already reaching out to probe Jake's intentions. What she found made her immediately pull back. The cold metal sensation in his mind had become something else entirely. Something that felt like barely contained lightning. Not fight, Jake corrected. Survive. The objective is simple. Stay alive for 72 hours while I hunt you through the Academy. Use everything you've learned about tactics, strategy, and psychological warfare. Turval's serpentine body coiled with nervous energy. This seems extreme for a classroom. Exercise. Commander Zethkar's reptilian features showed no emotion. The exercise has been approved by Academy leadership. You'll be monitored for safety, but the training will simulate real combat conditions. Jake checked his watch. The exercise begins in 1 hour. I suggest you use that time to prepare. As the cadets filed out of the classroom, their earlier confidence had evaporated completely. They were no longer dealing with a theoretical discussion about human warfare. They were about to face a human warrior who had defeated entire armies. This is insane, Vexhi whispered as they gathered in the corridor. He's one human against 12 superior beings. What can he possibly do to us? But even as he spoke, Vexhi's predator instincts were telling him to run. Every survival mechanism his species had evolved was screaming warnings about. Jake Morrison. The cadets spent their preparation hour trying to develop strategies. They would work together, using their combined advantages to overwhelm one human. Mordon's strength, Vexhi's speed, Salara's telepathy, Turval's flexibility. Surely their combined abilities could handle one middle-aged human. They had no idea that Jake Morrison had already begun his hunt. The Academy's corridors had been subtly modified. Lighting was dimmed to simulate combat conditions. Security cameras had been adjusted to create blind spots. The familiar pathways the cadets had walked for months suddenly felt foreign and threatening. Lisa Carter watched from the observation deck as the exercise began. She had been given special permission to monitor the training, officially to document human teaching methods. Unofficially, she wanted to see the alien cadets learn the same lesson she had learned years ago. Never underestimate a human warrior. The first sign of trouble came 6 hours into the exercise. Cadet Nextar, a scout from the aerial species, was moving through the upper corridors when he simply vanished. One moment he was visible on the security monitors. The next he was gone. The remaining cadets tried to reach him on their communication devices. Static answered their calls. Nextar's probably just hiding, Vexai said, but his voice carried doubt. He'll rejoin us when he's ready. They found Nextar an hour later, hanging unconscious from the ceiling of a maintenance shaft. He was unharmed, but completely unaware of how he had gotten there. His memory of the previous 2 hours was completely blank. What happened to him? Silara asked, checking Nextar's mind for signs of injury or trauma. I don't know, Nextar said when he regained consciousness. I was moving through the corridor, and then ... nothing, like I fell asleep while walking. The cadets began to understand that they were not participating in a normal training exercise. They were being hunted by something that operated by rules they did not understand. Jake Morrison moved through the academy like a living shadow. The alien cadets could never quite locate him, but they could feel his presence. He was always nearby, always watching, always ready to strike. Mordon's enhanced senses should have detected any approaching threat. His species had evolved to survive in environments where predators stalked them constantly. But Jake Morrison somehow moved without triggering any of Mordon's warning systems. The rocky alien found himself jumping at sounds that turned out to be nothing. His nerves, which had never failed him before, began to crack under the pressure of being constantly hunted. Vexai's compound eyes, designed to detect the slightest movement, kept showing him shadows that might or might not be human-shaped. Every corridor seemed to contain threats that vanished when he looked directly at them. Silara's telepathic abilities became more of a curse than a blessing. She could sense Jake Morrison's presence like a cold weight pressing against her mind, but she could never locate him precisely. He was everywhere and nowhere, a constant mental pressure that made her afraid to use her powers. The cadets tried to stay together for safety, but Jake's tactics systematically separated them. Corridors that had been clear minutes earlier suddenly became impassable due to maintenance work. Elevators developed mysterious malfunctions that stranded cadets on different floors. By the second day, the proud alien warriors were beginning to break down psychologically. They had expected to face a human in direct combat, where their physical advantages would ensure victory. Instead, they were being slowly dismantled by an opponent who refused to fight fair. Turval was the next to disappear. The serpentine alien had been guarding a corridor intersection when the lights went out. When they came back on 30 seconds later, he was gone. The security cameras showed nothing but empty space. They found Turval in a supply closet, unconscious and wrapped in his own equipment cables. Like Nextar, he had no memory of how he had gotten there. He's picking us off one by one, Vexai said, his voice cracking with stress. We need to stick together. But sticking together made them easier targets. Jake Morrison began using their group mentality against them. Sounds would echo from one direction, causing the cadets to move together toward the source. By the time they realized it was a diversion, another one of their number had vanished. Silara tried desperately to use her telepathic abilities to track Jake's location. But every time she reached out with her mind, she encountered that same cold metal sensation. It was getting stronger, more focused, like a weapon being aimed directly at her consciousness. The pressure in her mind began to affect her physical coordination. Her hands shook when she tried to use equipment. Her vision blurred when she tried to focus on distant objects. The constant mental pressure was breaking down her natural abilities. Mordon, despite his physical strength, found himself becoming clumsy and slow. His usual confidence was replaced by constant worry about attacks that could come from any direction. He began to understand why human mythology talked about fear as a weapon, On the third day, only 4 cadets remained active. Vexhai, Mordun, Silara, and Zarex had managed to avoid capture, but they were exhausted and terrified. They had barricaded themselves in a classroom, using furniture to block the doors and windows. But even their secure position felt unsafe. Jake Morrison had proven he could appear anywhere at any time. "We need to surrender," Zarex said, his forked tongue flicking nervously. "This isn't training anymore. It's torture." "We can't surrender to a human," Vexhai replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Our species will never forgive us." "Our species will never know," Mordun said quietly, "unless we survive to tell them." Silara had been trying to probe Jake's mental state for 3 days. What she found was getting worse. The controlled violence she had sensed before was becoming more focused, more immediate. It felt like standing next to a bomb that was counting down to 0. "He's coming," she whispered suddenly. "I can feel him getting closer." The lights in the classroom began to flicker. The 4 remaining cadets pressed themselves against the back wall, watching the barricaded door with terror. The door did not open. Instead, Jake Morrison's voice came from the ventilation system above them. "You're thinking like prey," his calm voice said from the ceiling. "Prey animals hide in corners and hope predators won't find them. But I'm not a predator. I'm something much worse." Vexhai looked up at the air vent, his compound eyes trying to spot movement in the darkness. "What are you?" "I'm a human who's tired of being underestimated," Jake's voice replied. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. "For 3 days, you've experienced what every human faces in combat. Being hunted by superior physical specimens who think strength is the only thing that matters." The temperature in the room began to drop. The cadets could see their breath in the suddenly cold air. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous?" Jake continued. "It's not our strength or speed or natural weapons. It's our ability to." The final 18 hours of the exercise broke the alien cadets completely. Jake Morrison did not hurt them physically, but he systematically destroyed their confidence, their pride, and their assumptions about human weakness. In the darkness, he became something beyond their understanding. He moved without sound, appeared without warning, and demonstrated abilities that should have been impossible for any human. The cadets experienced true helplessness for the first time in their lives. When the lights finally came back on, the 4 surviving cadets were found huddled together in the center of the classroom. They were physically unharmed, but psychologically shattered. Their eyes held the hollow look of beings who had stared into the abyss and seen it stare back. Jake Morrison sat calmly at the instructor's desk, grading papers as if nothing unusual had happened. He looked up as Commander Zethkar entered with medical personnel and academy officials. "Exercise complete," Jake reported in his usual steady voice. "All objectives achieved." The medics checked the cadets for injuries, while Commander Zethkar reviewed the security recordings. What he saw in those files would be studied by military analysts for years to come. Over 72 hours, Jake Morrison had demonstrated tactics that redefined asymmetric warfare. He had turned a familiar environment into a hunting ground, used the cadets' own strengths against them, and achieved complete psychological dominance without firing a single shot. "Instructor Morrison," Commander Zethkar said quietly, "that was educational." Jake nodded. That was the point. The alien cadets were given 3 days to recover before returning to classes. During that time, word of the exercise spread throughout the academy. Students from other species requested copies of the security recordings. Faculty members studied Jake's techniques with new respect. When classes resumed, the atmosphere had changed completely. The cadets who had experienced Jake's hunting exercise could barely look at him directly. They spoke in whispers and flinched. At unexpected sounds, But the real change became apparent during Jake's next lecture on human military history. This time, when he discussed human mythology and battlefield legends, no one laughed .Vex single quotes HAI, his compound eyes no longer gleaming. With arrogance, raised a trembling claw. Instructor Morrison, are all human soldiers capable of what you demonstrated? Jake considered the question carefully. Every human military unit has soldiers with similar training. What you experienced was standard psychological warfare doctrine. Nothing exceptional by human standards. The silence that followed was profound. The cadets were beginning to understand that Jake Morrison was not unique among humans. He was simply a representative sample of what their species could produce when properly motivated. Silara found her telepathic abilities permanently changed by the experience. She could no longer probe minds without remembering the cold metal sensation of Jake's consciousness. More disturbing, she had begun to sense similar mental patterns in other human personnel throughout the academy. The humans we dismissed as weak support staff, she whispered to her fellow cadets after class. I can feel it in their minds, too. They're all like him. They're all potential weapons. Morden nodded slowly. His rock-like confidence had been replaced by nervous awareness. We never paid attention to them before. We thought they were harmless. They wanted us to think that, Torval said. He had been found in increasingly creative hiding places throughout the exercise, each time with no memory of how he had gotten there. It was camouflage. They hide their capabilities until they need them. The psychological impact of the exercise extended beyond the participating cadets. Other students began studying human military history with genuine respect rather than amusement. The library's database showed increased access to files about human combat operations. Lisa Carter found herself treated differently by alien students. They no longer dismissed her as an inferior, being placed in the academy for diversity purposes. Instead, they approached her with careful respect, as if she might suddenly transform into something dangerous. How many humans like Instructor Morrison are there? Cadet Yeltar asked her one day in the library. Lisa smiled that same unsettling smile she had worn for weeks. Every human has the potential. We all learn to fight when we have to. It's part of our culture. She pulled up a file on her tablet showing human population statistics. There are approximately 12 billion humans in the galaxy. Most of them serve in support roles, as you know, but they all receive basic combat training. The alien cadet stared at the numbers with growing horror. 12 billion potential Jake Morrisons scattered throughout galactic civilization, hidden in plain sight. During the next few weeks, Jake's classes became the most popular courses at the academy. Students from species that had not been part of the original exercise requested permission to audit his lectures. They wanted to understand how humans had become so effective at warfare despite their apparent physical limitations. Jake taught them about human military doctrine with the same calm precision he had always used. And now his students listened with complete attention. They took detailed notes on every word, studied every tactical example, and asked serious questions about human combat psychology. Human warfare is based on adaptability, Jake explained. During one lecture, we cannot match the natural advantages of other species, so we learn to think differently about combat. We turn disadvantages into advantages. We use psychology as a weapon. We fight smarter, not harder. He activated the wall display, showing tactical diagrams from famous human victories. Every major human military success followed the same pattern. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and physically inferior. But we won because we understood something our enemies did not. Vexhai asked the question they were all thinking. What did you understand? Jake's gray eyes surveyed the classroom, full of attentive alien faces. That war is not about strength or technology or natural advantages. War is about will. The side that refuses to give up that adapts to every setback, that turns defeat into motivation. That side wins. He paused, letting the lesson sink in. Humans learned long ago that we would always be the underdogs in galactic conflicts. So we became very, very good at being underdogs. The cadets who had experienced the hunting exercise exchanged glances. They remembered the feeling of being systematically broken down by an opponent who refused to fight by their rules. Selara raised her hand. Is that why human mythology focuses on impossible victories? You're not fantasizing. You're documenting actual capabilities. Exactly, Jake confirmed. Human stories about berserkers, one-man armies, and impossible last stands are not myths. They're historical records. They're warnings to our enemies about what humans become when pushed to our limits. Mordoon's voice was quiet when he spoke. We thought your stories were compensation for weakness. They are compensation, Jake agreed, but not for physical weakness. They're compensation for the fact that most species underestimate us. Human mythology exists to remind us what we're capable of when others believe we're harmless. The transformation of the alien cadets was complete. They had begun the semester as arrogant beings who mocked human weakness. They ended it as respectful. Students who understood that appearance could be deceiving. More importantly, they spread their new understanding throughout the galactic military community. The recording of Jake's hunting exercise became required viewing at military academies across 12 star systems. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate humans based on physical appearance. 6 months after the exercise, Vex High was serving aboard a mixed-species patrol vessel. During a routine briefing, some of the alien crew members began making jokes about the human personnel. Vex High silenced them immediately. You don't mock humans, he said in a voice that carried absolute authority. Not ever. Not where I can hear you. The other aliens looked surprised. Why? They're just support staff. Vex High's compound eyes reflected the memory of 3 days. In hell, hunted by something that had looked like a harmless middle-aged human. Because human myths are not myths, he said quietly. They're promises. And if you ever make them keep those promises, you'll pray for a quick death. The joke stopped immediately. Throughout the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. The alien cadets who had survived Jake Morrison's lesson became teachers themselves, spreading respect for human capabilities wherever they served. Human mythology was no longer dismissed as primitive fantasy. It was studied as intelligence data, analyzed for tactical insights, and treated with the respect due to a species that had turned weakness into strength. Jake Morrison continued teaching at the Galactic Military Institute. His classes remained popular, his methods effective, and his reputation growing. But he was no longer unique among human instructors. The galaxy was learning that every human carried the potential for impossible victories. In the depths of space, on patrol ships and battle stations throughout civilized space, alien warriors who had once laughed at human stories now studied them. With careful attention, they understood, finally, that human mythology was not about what humans dreamed of becoming. It was about what humans had always been, and what they would always be when pushed too far.